What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the I'm Curious to Know project, day 30, May 30th, 2020. We've been at this for 30 days in a row. And today I'm pleased to welcome someone who is actually having a birthday. I want us to all wish a very happy birthday to Carl Thomas. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Travis, and thanks for the shout out. We all have birthdays. Some we'd like to avoid going forward, but I have not figured that part out yet.
How's 35 treating you now that you've just
it's really good to be 35 again. No, it's awesome. I feel great. I'm in really good shape. We've managed to stay fit through these sort of absurdity we've all been dealing with at various levels. And as I shared with you a bit earlier, had a great walk on the beach this morning in Southern California, Del Mar, one of the great beaches in the world, not just in Southern California.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, we've got a lot to cover today. There's some history that I really, really want to talk about. And my claim to fame is that I did my first triathlon in Australia when I was 8 years old. So that was 1990-ish. And at the time, triathlon was in its early days. But you have a history that lends itself to being, even before I was born, this triathlon thing became a thing. Before we get there, I want to talk about your athletic background because, as was the case in the day, you either were a swimmer, you were either a runner, or you were a cyclist. And then you potentially became a triathlete because of the crossover of sports as cross-training. So let us know a little bit about your background as an athlete.
Right. Well, thanks for that, Travis. I started in aquatics as a competitive swimmer at 6 years old. Grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and showed some promise early on. Stayed with it, even though I wanted to quit several times. My parents, sort of said, "No, you got some talent here. You should stick it out," which I'm super thankful that I did. Sort of fast forward, I was good enough as I sort of began high school, made the varsity all 4 years in high school, and then my senior year in high school began to get recruited by colleges in my sort of, at the championship season, senior year in high school, won 2 events, set league and statewide records in both those events, and entered UCLA that fall on a scholarship for swimming. When I got to UCLA, I had just gone through my first U.S. Olympic trials in swimming. I came 17th out of maybe 40 guys that swam in that particular event. But it was really the big time, and set, I think, the stage for me extremely well heading into what then was the Pac-8, now the Pac-12. As a scholarship swimmer. The interesting thing there is our swimming coach was a water polo coach first. And he got the swimming coach job because don't hire 2 coaches, right? Hire 1 coach. So as I entered UCLA that fall, having never played water polo, I was required to play water polo as an incoming freshman. Because the swimming season was in the winter quarter and water polo was played in the fall, sort of simultaneous with NCAA football.
Yeah.
So as I entered UCLA and got in the pool for the first practice for the water polo squad, there were no less than 7 high school All-Americans in water polo that I now was playing against, and literally I didn't know up from down or sideways. But I learned very quickly, because if you didn't, you didn't get out of the pools.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And then fast forward, you do what you can in swimming and water polo. You're obviously fit. You're obviously healthy, and then you move on to a career at Speedo,
right.
which is your first introduction, what I believe, into triathlon. Tell us about kind of that journey and that movement.
Right. Well, I was as I left UCLA, hit the Olympic trials a second time, came 5th that time, missed the Olympic team in swimming by about a yard, then diverted all my attention to water polo, made the U.S. national water polo team, and as we were heading toward what would have been a follow-up to the bronze medal winning team in Munich, come to find out that we don't qualify to go to Montreal. The Canadians get a hall pass as the host country, and the prior year we had lost to Mexico in the Pan Am finals. So Mexico got the other bid. But I looked really hard at that as I was getting ready to sort of end my, if you will, competitive athletic career, join Speedo. But it always gnawed on me that our water polo team, in my opinion, was mismanaged from the top.
Right.
So as an executive, I came in as a, I managed the eastern half of the country for promotions and marketing for Speedo. I took it upon myself to get very active, if you will, politically in the sport of water polo. At the time, Speedo was the, preeminent sponsor for all four aquatic disciplines: swimming, water polo, diving, synchronized swimming, not only domestically here in the US, but globally via the FINA. So there was a natural sort of segue for me into that role because it was part of my responsibility at Speedo anyway. And I did a pretty deep dive into the mechanics of how and why water polo as a sport was structured the way it was. And as I was doing that, I got a call from a really close friend of mine, also an athlete. She actually was a gold medalist in the 60s, Donna De Verona. And Donna said, listen, I want you to do me a favor. We 4 athletes have been invited to go to Washington, D.C. And testify before Senator Ted Stevens' committee on the Amateur Sports Act legislation that he has in development. Yep. And what we didn't know at the time was that not just was what I was dealing with in water polo, quote unquote, mismanaged, but at the macro level, the U.S. Congress was actually taking a role in essentially, Travis, rewriting the way sport was managed in this country. I had an amazing experience in Washington, D.C. with 3 other athletes. And we're sitting at the table there, and you've sort of seen it now in a completely different format. But we're sitting in front of Stevens' whole committee answering questions for 2 hours. It was unbelievable. And that sort of set the stage for a way deeper understanding of not only, if you will, the politics of sport, but the actual organizational structure and requirements of sport. So as I continued on in Speedo after that, listen, a couple of things happened. I became, the marketing VP at Speedo, and my job was to sell swimwear and position the brand, which was already the global leader in aquatics, but position the brand as forward-thinking, innovative, not only in terms of product design, color, expansion of the product line, but also in terms of where and how Speedo chose to invest sponsorship dollars, because it's pretty easy to keep being the national sponsor of swimming and diving and water polo. But what was next? So lots of folks read this article, but in 1978 or 9, Sports Illustrated wrote an article. Barry McDermott authored it, and he wrote about the Ironman competition. Yeah. Now, all the way along, while not specifically aware of triathlon, I was a beach lifeguard in LA County because, you sort of were able to do that as a swimmer and a water polo player and segue that between and among your training sessions. So it was a good way to earn money and a lot of other things. But one of the key parts of that was lifeguard competition. And Australia is super famous for their lifeguard competitions. And still today, the Yanks pale in comparison to what the Aussies are able to do. But we did have a competition called the Ironman. And I literally thought, it was swimming, running, and rowing a dory. So you had, and I think paddleboarding. So there were 4 parts to the Ironman competition in lifeguard. But that's what I thought the article was going to be about when I opened SI. Wrong. It was about this gruel-a-thon, which I came to call it, the Ironman competition in Hawaii. And that sort of got my wheels turning. I started to really think about how Speedo could begin to talk to broader segments of athletes and participants, and how we could connect those dots. Yeah. The Ironman was literally unreachable for mere mortals. I mean, you had to be, back in those days, sort of nuts to do it. But when I looked around, and there was really no sort of, if you will, everyman weekend warrior triathlon format. and in 1991 thought very seriously about it. Came up with the concept. We tweaked the format for a couple of years, and in 1984 really became the watershed year for the sport of triathlon, where we settled on what are now and have been since 1984, called then the International Standard Distance, but then pivoted to the Olympic distance format of 1,500 meter swim, 40K by 10K run. And that first came to the fore, if you will, in 1984. And then we aggressively marketed not only our event, our series, but the format globally, signed a licensing deal with the nascent Japan Triathlon Federation in Japan. They adopted the format. We provided them all of our production manuals on the how-to. And as was very typical in those days, the Japanese took what we had designed and what we had formatted for 3 consecutive years, and in their first year did it better than we did.
Yeah, I love that. Do you think that you were uniquely positioned with your background in marketing, with your background in the political side of the sport, to be at the forefront of what was essentially the movement towards the Olympics and the beginning of USA Triathlon and the beginning of the International Triathlon Union? Is that something you've thought about? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've thought about it a lot. You know, it was sort of the confluence of a whole career, not only as an athlete, but as a marketer, as someone who understood at the very basic but more broadly and deeply levels what it took to organize sport, not only at the event level, but at the state, regional, and national level. And what triathlon desperately, I felt, needed was organizational structure at the national governing body level. So in 1982, as we were launching the series in 5 cities that year, and then on to 12 cities in 1983, I led, but there were a number of folks who all jumped in the boat with me. We launched what we called USTA, United States Triathlon Association. At the time, although I probably knew it, I didn't really take into account the fact that tennis already had a USTA. So when we first launched that, we sort of struggled with what, you know, really call it. It became TriFed USA, and then it is what it is today, USA Triathlon. At the same time, I recognized also the possibility at that point of the Olympic format and the Olympic Games. And so the organizational infrastructure required to do that, what was, sort of 2-tiered. One, there needed to be national governing body organizations. They call it National Federation in Canada. It's called a variety of things. But that needed to happen at the country level, but then it needed to roll up into an international federation. I was super familiar with the International Federation structure, again, through the aquatics background and the relationship that I had with the FINA executives, which is the international governing body for aquatics. And so sort of nearly simultaneously began to envision and then start the practical work of forming an organization, creating a constitution, doing all that sort of stuff. And that early organization was called FIT, Federation International Triathlon. Again, I stepped on somebody's toes because trampoline is called FIT. So ultimately that morphed into ITU. So I co-founded that. And when ITU sort of became official at the first Congress in 1989, I was elected the first treasurer. Yeah.
What a brilliant backstory. I've read through the articles. I'm a tri historian and fan from the moment that I remember. And it's really cool to hear these stories from you firsthand. I'm sure there was hard times. I'm sure it was really difficult to get this brand new sport, these brand new distances, these brand new federations. There's got to be pushback from multi-levels. Tell me about some of those struggles that you guys faced in those days.
Right. I mean, there was a 5-year period there where the sport literally hung in the political balance of, a few folks. And there was a lot of cajoling, a lot of presenting, a lot of arguing, a lot of persuading, a lot of getting up and stomping out of meetings. I mean, all of those sort of bits and pieces that you would expect from a nascent, growing, birthing an organization. But fundamentally, I always go back to those fundamentals. Sport is a few things. Athletes, and in the case of USTS and the international format, now the Olympic format, it was widely embraced by the athletic community, not just the elites, the pros, the Scott Tinleys, the Mark Allens, the Scott Molinas, the Dave Scotts of the world, but way widely adopted by those who aspired to be triathletes. I mean, you just said your first triathlon was when you were 8 years old. Yeah. And the point here is that without that massive participation-based, what I'll call amateur component to our sport, not sure it would have ever gotten to where it did get. And there's tons of stories, Travis, and I could regale you and this audience for hours on the intrigue and the thises and the that's and the backyard fights and the cigar, figuratively smoking cigars in cigar-spilled rooms, trying to cut deals and get things off. Because there were a couple of real, what I'll call inflection points. One was North America versus the rest of the world.
Right.
Generally speaking, there, especially on the European continent, there was this sort of fundamental skepticism, in some quarters distrust of what was happening in North America, and then secondly, there was this argument about format. There was a huge contingent, mostly in Europe, some in North America, that believed the Ironman format was the holy grail, was where this sport needed to end up. I led the charge that from a practical perspective, if any of you in this room or any of your constituents not in this room, but who you work with and for and report to, have any clear notion or understanding of the Olympic movement and the Olympic Games, you will know right now that the Ironman triathlon has zero chance of making it onto the Olympic program. Yeah. Just because of its pure length and requirement from an athletic perspective, not only the logistical nightmare of putting an Ironman on in an Olympic city. Yeah. And that was a drumbeat that I relentlessly pounded for all those years. And every time I got the microphone, people were like, roll their eyes because here it comes again. But in the end, that consistency, that persistence, that belief in the vision and the format, held us all in good stead at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the rest is history. I want to hear your thoughts on why do you think there was such an uptake of the sport from the amateur side? It was still quite an effort for people. The Olympic distance was still 2.5 hours to 3 hours, if not longer for most people, the equivalent of almost a half marathon to a marathon type distance. So it's not easy for someone to take on. But you mentioned that it was this uptake immediately from the amateur side. What do you think that was?
Fundamentally, two things. One, the awareness of fitness. Frank Shorter's marathon and the 72 Munich Olympic Games put American marathoners on the map in a really sort of interesting way. And then over that next 8 to 10 years, whether it was Bill Rogers, Frank Shorter, or Jim Fix, or the explosion of Runner's World as a magazine, and the proliferation then of unique magazine titles and content pillars around sport and fitness and endurance, and how all of those things work together to ultimately make somebody or someone or someone's a lot more fit. But I think that dovetailed almost perfectly, Travis, with the demographic shifts that were going on.
Yeah.
If you want to call it the baby boomer generation, go ahead, because there were more of them at that moment in time than any other single demographic age segment, both men and women. And they were very dialed in and tuned in, not only to physical fitness, but nutritional fitness and the sort of mind, body, spirit aspect to it. And I think triathlon came along at the perfect time, struck the perfect chord. People literally looked at that distance and said, well, I've run a 10K.
Yeah.
I've ridden my bike for 50 miles on a weekend ride. I can do this.
Yeah.
And they used that I can do this as motivation and inspiration to get more fit. And it was really a struggle for the cyclists and runners who didn't have any background in swimming to become proficient enough in swimming to not drown. Essentially, let's call a spade, because it's especially when you go into open water. Swimming in a nice pool, nice bright blue water, black line on the bottom, see it, no problem, can get to the side. You get into an ocean or you get into a lake where you've got thrashing bodies all around you and you can't see forward, back, up, down, or whatever, and you're in the black water. That can be a really scary thing. And in those years, that was the biggest single hurdle, I think, for aspiring triathletes.
And in those days, there was a lot of ocean swims, and there was a lot of tough swimming, as a part of the event. It's not like today where there's a ripple and they'll cancel the swim. It was, you got to go out past the breakers and you're out in the open ocean.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of times where that starting gun sounded and I just said a prayer, man. I said, geez, I hope we don't have any bikes left in the transition area after this swim.
Yeah.
But, the amazing part of it is in much like we're sort of facing today with quite a different challenge. That's human spirit, that I can do this, that relentless pursuit and not giving up and sort of facing the fear and hurdling the fear was awesome to watch in those days, because in many instances, you just wouldn't have expected some of those folks to ever get out of the water.
Yeah. Well, it's true to this day, though, as well. I think that, there's a lot more people who are more proficient, but there's still instances. You go to any race around the country, around the world, where you look at the start line, you're like, or you look at you get to the finish line and you're like, how did that person do it? And it makes makes your heart beat a little faster and you get goosebumps and you're like, this is so inspirational that people are going above and beyond to achieve something.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear you say that, because that part I don't think ever changes.
Yeah, you're right. Now, I want to skip forward a few years. The USTS is growing and building, and then we hit the 90s, and the movement towards the Olympics starts to happen in earnest. And the call comes in to Les McDonald, and it's we're considering you for the Olympics. Tell me about that next phase of from that moment to standing by the Harbour Bridge in the Opera House in Sydney in 2000.
An amazing story, because to your earlier point, a lot of things had to go right. So I'll start with the inaugural Congress in 1989. We'd gone through 5 tough years of debate, of argument, of if you will, politic in general. And we were finally coming together. And actually, it took a very formidable adversary to bring the triathlon community in lockstep with each other. And this moment in time was really a galvanizing moment where everybody who labored in the triathlon space, whether it had been 2 years or in my case, 8 years, looked around each other and put political differences, cultural differences, socioeconomic differences, all those differences went aside, and we actually galvanized together and faced the enemy. And the enemy, in this case, the adversary, was an existing Olympic sport called pentathlon, modern pentathlon, and their organizing body, UIPMB, and I won't bore you with what all those letters mean, but they were the equivalent of the International Federation for Modern Pentathlon. They actually managed a multi-sport, multi-discipline event called Modern Pentathlon. And they sort of felt like this multi-sport arena was theirs to control. So at that first 89 Congress, they were there in force, their entire executive board. We did the right thing by giving them sort of their own dais over to the side. So in retrospect, it was kind of a brilliant move executionally, because what we did is we set them up as murderers row, right? They, as the first day of the Congress went on, it became very clear to everyone in that room who the adversary was. So that sort of, at that moment, a couple of things happened. They kept pushing for adoption of their rules, and I sort of we had our rules set up, Travis, and pretty much the whole world of triathlon was following those rules, which was awesome. But Modern Pentathlon would not agree to use our system. They wanted to rewrite the whole thing. So I actually called for a vote from the floor, from the dais, because I was sitting on the dais with Les McDonald, actually on his wing. We always sat next to each other because we whispered in each other's ear the whole time. And I said, listen, folks, can we agree to sort of acquiesce and join the UIPMB with the proviso that our competition rules, our way of doing things goes along with it?
Yep.
And we sort of watched the body language. There was, people were sort of getting tired of this debate, and before we could even call for the vote, the president of the UIPMB, who was a Russian, uttered one word: "Niet." That's all he said.
Yeah.
And our executive board turned and looked at that group, and I said, I withdraw the motion. And within 2 hours, the whole group unanimously voted to institutionalize, organize ITU as a standalone international federation, and it was over.
Yeah.
That was in 1989. Les and I then went on the road for 3 years. Literally, it felt like 3 years. We were chasing the IOC all over the world. Every time there was an executive board meeting, we were there. We were looking around in lobbies. We were interacting with the board members, telling the story of what triathlon was. Yeah. And it was in the spring of 1992. Later that summer, the Olympic Games would be in Barcelona. That was Juan Antonio Samparanch's hometown. It was his dream from the moment he became the IOC president. And the executive board that spring, I want to say it was in April, met, and we were there. And we learned as the meeting was convening that the ITU was on the agenda, quote unquote. We didn't really know what it was. We didn't know what it meant. We didn't know exactly what was going to be discussed or debated. What we did know is that we had done our job well over the prior 3 years, because there wasn't one of those IOC board members that didn't know about us. They, didn't necessarily understand the competition format itself, but they knew who the ITU was, and they knew who we were because they saw us every time they convened. And when that meeting broke up, Samaranch led the group out of the meeting room, made a beeline, literally came straight to Les and myself standing there. And there were a couple of other of our folks there. Marisol Casado was there. She was now the ITU president, as you know. Yeah. And he walked straight to Les, shakes his hand. He says, "Congratulations, you have recognition." And we looked at each other and said, "Great."
What? Hang on.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean? And as you've heard me say before, Travis, what it actually did mean was that once we were recognized by the IOC as a legitimate standalone international federation governing our sport, meant that we were now surrounded by an impenetrable fence as the one, the only, and forever exclusive international federation for triathlon. And 12 months later, our format was accepted under the program for Sydney 2000.
Yep. What an amazing experience. Obviously that must have been something that you obviously look back clearly with joy, and as a highlight of your life, being able to see that through Now, tell me about the next, 7 years, getting ready for that first appearance in Sydney. There must be a heavy lift to get that off the ground and start to form around a international series and all of those things. Tell me about what that next 7 years is like.
Right. Well, that really sort of became the mechanics. We had a couple of things really going in our favor. One was Australia, which fully embraced these multi-sport events. The Australian spirit is indefatigable, as you know, and it was awesome that the debut of triathlon as Olympic sport took place in Sydney.
Yeah.
The mechanics between 1993 and actually at the start line in 2000 were interesting, and yes, at some level challenging, but far less arduous than the prior 10 years, because we knew what we knew, and we knew that it could not be taken away from us.
Yeah.
So honing the format, rolling out an ITU World Cup, staging a World Championships every year, doing all those things that an international federation has to do, as well as encourage national governing bodies at the country level to penetrate it on down to, lakes and rivers and pools and oceans and streets and roads and all of that. That was really where the spade work was, and for the most part, the funding for these national governing bodies, literally everywhere in the world except for the US, comes out of government.
Yeah.
So once the Olympic recognition was achieved, once the sport was on the program officially as a medal sport, not a demonstration sport, that paved the way and unleashed government funding across the world for national governing bodies, and then now you were really starting to see this canvas, this mural, the mosaic of the global sport of triathlon get filled in a super interesting, very colorful way, as you know. And then I don't think the Aussies could have done it any better. It was pulled off almost, well, I'll give it a 10.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen that often. For the first crack at a gold medal, I don't think anybody you talk to that was either there or saw it on TV would tell you any differently. It was spectacular.
The Aussies might have other thoughts, because the real hope was 2 gold medals.
Of course it was.
We only managed to get a silver. So there might be something left on the table as far as the Aussies are concerned in those games. Tell me about what it was like standing back, watching this all unfurl, this first medal opportunity at the Olympic Games. What were you thinking at that time?
Right. Sadly for me, I was not personally there. I took it all in from Southern California. But for me, it's almost indescribable to sort of watch it actually happen. But I literally had the same feeling 4 years ago watching Gwen Jorgensen in Rio go hammer and tong with the Swiss girl right up until the last 3K of the run, and then Gwen, the amazing athlete that she is, literally separates in 100 meters, and you knew right then that it was over. But that feeling of watching it unfold 20 years on, 16 years on, in that sort of magical way, brought all those memories back from Sydney. And I remember like it was yesterday, the start line of the swim, everyone lined up on that blue carpeted dock in the harbor, with the backdrop of the brilliance of the Sydney harbor. It's just spectacular. I mean, you can't put it into words.
Yeah. Well. So I want to personally thank you, because if not for the work that you did, many people watching this show may not have ever done a triathlon. My life would be very different if it wasn't for triathlon and my participation. So I think we all have a debt of gratitude to owe you for the work that you were able to do, and the heavy lift to get it all going. So thank you for that.
You're more than welcome. It was a labor of love, but also listen. There are many points to the motivational star, right?
Yeah.
It came out of business acumen married to my athletic career and my strong Olympic desire at whatever level.
Yeah.
So having, been fortunate to make a U.S. national water polo team, swim in a couple of Olympic trials, go to Washington, D.C. and testify in front of Ted Stevens and his committee, all of those things sort of, all came together. The recipe is always interesting when you taste it and it's like, wow, this is awesome. What's in this? And then you get 20 ingredients, right?
Yeah.
But that's the mastery of being the chef. And I feel so fortunate, Travis, to have been there at that time and played my part in what I think is one of the great stories of the birthing of a sport from inception to Olympic gold medals.
Yeah. And in reality, it happened very quickly. If you think about other sports that are, centuries old, and they start in the Olympics, but to watch a sport, in your lifetime and almost in my lifetime come to life and then get to the Olympics and now be thriving around the world, it's happened really quickly. And I actually think that there's all this talk about how triathlon's suffering and the numbers are down and there's decline and, all of these things. My point to that is, or my retort to that is, it's still a young sport. We're still finding our feet. We're still finding the best format. The world's changing, as you know, and it's going to have to adapt and change, as everything else is as well. But we still have to realize that it's still young.
No, I think that's well said. Adaptation, change, innovation.
Yeah.
Look at the glass a little differently. Fundamentally, every sport goes through its sort of cycles, right?
Yeah.
Up, down, back, forth. There's a reason that we here, fortunate enough to be living, within a stone's throw of the Pacific Ocean, go to the beach and watch the tide come in and go out. It ebbs, it flows. There's this rhythm, and I think oftentimes the focus, the desire to take a snapshot in time and then call that a trend is about the worst thing you can possibly do. Yeah. So the breathe in, breathe out, the rhythm, all of those things are very natural. So if there's a little bit of a deflate in the sport in terms of participation or whatever, that to me is an obvious duh. It's gonna happen. Don't lose the forest for the trees, right?
Yeah. And I think even at the top level, the adaptation now with the introduction of mixed team relay, becomes even, there's the team aspect to the sport now. It's even shorter than a 2-hour race or a 1 hour 45 race. It's an hour long. It's the sprint distance. The distances those athletes are participating in are so approachable for people who are watching on TV. A 300 meter swim, 10K bike and 2K run or what have you is anyone can do that. So I think that is a really wise move that has, added another medal opportunity for countries. I think it's great.
I agree with you, and it's not only added another medal opportunity, but it's taken what has sort of quintessentially been a uniquely individual sport and added a team aspect to it. And for myself, we talked earlier on about my athletic career. The one of the best things that ever happened to me athletically is I spent all my formative years as an individual athlete, save for the relay in swimming. When I got a chance to be part of a 7-man team in water polo, and you slice and dice your roles, somebody's the quarterback, somebody's the wideout, somebody's the fullback, somebody's the cornerback, to use football terms or American football terms. That to me was so fun, and it allowed me to leverage my, obviously at that point, significant swimming capability into the strategy of being part of a team and sort of learning each other's ins and outs to a point where no look passes, you knew you could do it because you knew your teammate was where he was supposed to be expected.
Yeah.
And that's why at UCLA we won, 3 out of 4 national championships in a row, and the only one we didn't win, we lost in double overtime, double sudden death. Right. I mean, so we were formidable then, but it was so cool to be a part of the team, and I applaud Marisol and the entire ITU board, all the way down to the NGBs, to adopt this, what I think is a super cool relay concept. And I think you'll see more innovation and adaptation, and I think over time, more medal opportunities will come forth within the sport of triathlon.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing it happen. This has been an amazing conversation, a deep dive into the history of the sport. We've left out probably 7 or 8 things that we need to talk about, which I think will be a second show for us, because there's so much else of your life, other parts of your life that I'm really curious to know. But we're out of time. But I want to finish up with 3 questions that I throw the way of each of my guests, and I'm going to throw them your way and see what your answers are. The first question: what's one thing that's changed for you during this isolation, lockdown, stay-at-home period that you want to keep once we go into whatever the next phase of normal is for us all?
Right. I think it's paying attention to how one spends one's time. For me, time management and being very cognizant of the time that has been taken away from me to do things that I normally would have done has allowed me to refocus on where and how best to spend my time, whether it's work, whether it's working out, training. And, I in a normal course, Travis, I'm a swimmer. I swim 5 to 6 days a week, and I've got a very odd workout. I jump in the pool and I do 40 laps, period, end of story. And I do it in a variety of strokes, and I do it in a variety of time sequences, but that's it for me. And that has been taken away from me. I can't wait for the pools to come back. I also ride stationary bikes. So I don't have a Peloton in my garage. I wish I did. So I'm keen to have the fitness center reopen in a way where I can, sort of turn that workout or training or keeping in shape activity back into those 2 things that I know I love because I've missed them. Yeah. So that's, I think, paying attention to how I choose to spend my time.
Yeah, very good. I hope that, I've heard that quite a lot. We've had the same feeling at home, and I hope that we can all keep it as a priority, because it has been something that has been a positive out of this for us as well. Second question, Carl. What is one thing that you thought was important before this period that you're happy to leave in the past?
Well, that's a really good question, because I've tried to leave. My wife and I together, we sort of call this the garbage heap, right? So when you throw something in the garbage, that's step 1. What you don't want to do is leave the garbage bag in the house.
Right.
It's got to go out to the curb, and it's got to go on the truck, and it's got to be gone. And only then can you, sort of make room for the next wave of what's going to be thrown away. So I think in combination, it's not only what I am choosing to do with my time, but the flip side of that coin is, where was I spending time with people, with places, with things that really don't matter, that aren't really that important. So what makes the cut list is a sort of a really important exercise we all need to go through as individuals. So the catchphrase is control what you can control.
Yep.
And those things that you cannot control, try the best you can to not let them bother you or worry you, because you can't control them.
Yep. Love that. Very good. The garbage heap. You've been in our house. My wife taps you on the shoulder all the time. When are you going to take that out there, guy? Third and final question. What's been your most memorable moment of joy during this period?
That's easy. Our second grandchild was born in February, right before all of this hit. Here's another story, Travis, that you and I should come back on. My wife and I took a bucket list trip to Austria and Switzerland to ski, departed LAX on the 4th of March, returned to LAX on the 19th of March. That's a whole other story. But the joy of the birth of our grandson, he's our second grandchild. He has an older sister who just turned 3 last weekend, and we got a chance to go hang with them. So the joy of being able to be with and watch those grandkids, that's the easiest answer of the 3 questions.
Yeah, very cool. Carl, this has been amazing. I honestly want to have you back on the show at some point because there's so much more we need to talk about, but I appreciate your articulation of what is a rich history in the sport. It's given me the opportunity to talk to one of the godfathers, which I'm very grateful for. And I look forward to staying in touch and hearing more from you in the future.
No, I hope we can do, Travis. This was awesome. I loved telling the stories, and as you know, there's a whole lot more to this than we've been able to touch on, and I hope you will have me back. I'd love to do it.
Absolutely. And enjoy the rest of your birthday, 35. What a milestone.
I love that. I love it. It's cool of you, actually.
Yeah. All the best.
Thank
Thanks.
you.